Hello, and welcome back to the Right Brain Podcast. Both my parents are here today. They just flew in from New York once again.
And my arms are tired.
And your arms are tired. And from flying?
Yeah.
Dad. That took me a while to get that joke. They're coming to see me play at the Bluebird tonight.
Yes. So excited about that.
My
That is
second
so
time
cool.
playing there. It's going to be really fun. Yeah, so it's gonna be good. But today I think we decided we're gonna talk about thyroid issues, which is also an autoimmune issue.
Right. We'll talk about autoimmune because, again, what most people don't realize, and even a lot of doctors don't have any idea, is how intimately the brain, the nervous system, and the immune system work together. And more, that is coming out that the brain really takes maybe the lead role in all of that. So whenever there's an autoimmune issue, what does that mean? It means that basically your immune system is attacking your own body. And your immune system should never attack your own body. We even have mechanisms to make sure there are chemicals our body produces to be able to say that, this is my own body, this is a foreign invader. And but then that gets messed up. And we see that more and more, we're seeing autoimmune issues are just everywhere. And that overlaps with a lot of food sensitivities and things like gluten sensitivity, actually.
Okay. And do you think, well, okay, first of all, I think you said there was something called like hypo and
Right.
hyperthyroidism.
Yeah, so hyperthyroid, where there's too much thyroid hormone being produced, is called Graves' disease. This
Oh,
is where
okay.
you might see things on TV for thyroid eye disease, like TED, where people's eyes bulge out of their head a little bit. Like that's one
Oh,
of the signs of hyperthyroidism, when there's too much thyroid hormone. And then there's hypothyroid, that is autoimmune, and that is called Hashimoto's.
right.
Now, in reality, a lot of people that have it will fluctuate between hyper and hypo.
Oh,
And
I didn't know that.
yeah, and that's kind of the nature, and both of them are immune related. So Graves' disease and Hashimoto's are both considered to be caused by immune dysregulation or autoimmune issues. They might slightly target some different things, but for the most part. And so, what may happen initially when the thyroid gland is overactive, it may increase production. And then that may trigger the immune system to attack it more, which then will cause some destruction or damage, and then end up with reduced thyroid hormone. And that's where you see, like a Hashimoto's type thing. But then it may rebound back. If the autoimmune storm, if the inflammation, if the immune reaction goes down, then the thyroid gland may pick back up. But because it's autoimmune, the more active the gland is, the more the immune system will want to attack it.
Okay. So what I'm wondering is, like, because obviously we talk about left brain, right brain all the time on here. And I know from just like a lot of my friends that are actors and singers. And I listened to a podcast with like an actress recently saying that during one of her roles, she like randomly gained 80 pounds and it was like this huge problem and she couldn't lose weight. And another one of my actor friends said like when she was younger, she was told to lose weight for a role and she was like working out so hard and she couldn't figure it out. And I've had a lot of friends in the creative industry that like their whole life have struggled with weight issues or things like that and never had any idea that it had to do with their thyroid. Only to find out like years later and after going through like all this trauma of like thinking something was wrong with them. But is that something that right brain people are more prone to, or it just can happen to anyone?
Actually, from a neurological perspective, the left brain typically is more about immune activation. So, and it tends to be more related to what we call the sympathetic nervous system and the fight or flight system. So typically when you get people that are left brain dominant and right brain weak. So the way the two hemispheres work in the immune system is the left hemisphere tends to activate the immune system, and the right hemisphere tends to suppress it, right? That's how they work. The left hemisphere comes on when we need to attack something and protect us, and then the right hemisphere should come on and stop it. So one creates more like an inflammatory response, which is where you're attacking something. So basically we have these barrier systems in our body. We have skin, we have our lung lining, mucous membranes, we have our gut, and we have the blood-brain barrier. Those are kind of our borders. Anything gets through a border, so you get a cut, bacteria gets into your body, and then your body should recognize it, and then it should put together an attack to kill it. And generally that is made up of what's called the innate immune system and or the Th1 system, T helper 1. And that's primarily, those systems are primarily white blood cells. So we have white blood cells, things like neutrophils, basophils, monocytes, lymphocytes, eosinophils, and they are the killers.
Sorry. I don't know any of those words, but yes.
You shaking your head like you knew it really well.
I love that's what you're supposed to do on a podcast.
Yeah. So, when you get attacked, you're supposed to have these white blood cells essentially that will go and kill something. But then on the other end, you have something called B cells, which are from bone marrow, and they produce antibodies. Antibodies don't kill things, but they are there to mark things that need to be killed. So if we get an attack, then the antibodies are there to kind of, attach to them and say to the killers, okay, come here, you got to kill these things. So what happens is those signals can get messed up. And that's what produces autoimmune, where the body looks, where the immune system is looking at parts of your body like it's a foreign invader, or it may be looking at certain foods like gluten or casein or another protein from a food as a foreign invader, and then it will, attack the body. And that can happen in the thyroid. If it happens in the thyroid, it can either cause Graves' disease, where the immune system may be overactive initially, and then it may result in Hashimoto's, where the thyroid gland now, because it's going through this kind of destructive phase. But it also often might swell up. So, the thyroid gland is this kind of butterfly gland in your throat.
It's not under here. These are like your lymph nodes.
Right. That's the lymph nodes. It's really kind of right here by
in the center
where
of your
your where the Adam's apple kind of is, right? It's called your cricoid cartilage. And that's why when people have overactive thyroid or have any sort of thyroid disease, they might get what's called a goiter, where their neck looks like it swells.
Even in women, if they don't have an Adam's apple, you would see that?
Yes, because they still have the gland there. And so if the gland swells up, then you might see that get might see like puffiness or swelling.
Okay, so it's something you can physically see on people. Maybe.
At certain points, maybe, right. Not all the time. And more often than not, it's more something that you're going to see because of the symptoms that are going to come about.
But how come it's so hard for people to pinpoint that that's what the problem is? Or at least that's what it seems like happens pretty often. Like, what would be symptoms and that people get, and then why are they mistaken for other things?
Yeah, well, it's often because the blood test might not completely show it. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine, a guy named Dr. Datis Karazian, has written one of the most popular books.
What's up, Datis?
And it's called Why Do I Have Thyroid Symptoms When All My blood tests are normal? Basically, that's the title of the book. And he does a really good job describing how the blood tests may not always really show you what's going on. And so therefore, people may look like they're okay when they're not. They're clearly not feeling. And the thing about it that's become more common of late in the last, let's say, 10 years, 15 years, which is really a lot of the part of his book, is that the relationship to gluten sensitivity or other autoimmune issues. So that some people might have certain situations where, it's not celiac disease. Celiac disease is really true gluten allergy, but they may have gluten sensitivity where if they eat gluten, it triggers their immune system. But the gluten molecule and the amino acids that are in that look a lot like some of the chemicals in the thyroid gland. So what happens is that when somebody eats gluten, if they have a gluten sensitivity, that can then turn those antibodies that you shouldn't have antibodies against food either, right? Antibodies are there really to protect us primarily against bacteria, viruses, fungus, parasites, yeast, molds, things like that. You should never really form antibodies against foods. That should never happen. We should never get allergies. Allergies is abnormal. So anytime you're having an allergic response to like food or anything like that, allergies to the environment, it means your immune system isn't really working correct and it's a little bit overactive. And so you shouldn't form antibodies against foods, but more and more people do because our gut and our immune system and our brain isn't working well in a balanced way to regulate that. And so when people eat gluten, it will then attack the thyroid gland. And because it looks the same to the immune system. And the immune system thinks that gluten itself is like a bad guy, which it shouldn't be because it's just a food.
Okay, very fascinating. But we love gluten. I eat sourdough like every other day, but apparently that's the only bread that doesn't spike your blood sugar. So I don't know if that changes things, but yeah.
It might, but it really comes down to if you have antibodies. There's nothing wrong with the food. Like, people out there, lots of people think, oh, gluten is evil. It's not. I mean, and there is something different about it. Part of the reason why it might be increasing is because the gluten molecule itself has been messed with.
It's been modified, yeah.
Genetically modified. And so, the gluten, when I was growing up, gluten, was different than it is now. And in different parts of the world, it may be different, where the grains have been modified. So they're meant to be more, puffy. And so that you get a big, puffy bagel or something like that. And it's more what we call hydrophilic, meaning it will attract more water and will expand. But because of that, it's also made it harder to break down in our digestive system. And because of that, if we don't break it down completely and we have larger molecules, gluten itself should really never get into our bloodstream. It should be broken down to small little amino acids. But it may not be able to, one, because the gut may not be producing as much acid or enzymes as it should produce. And the other is that the gluten molecule now is very resistant to that and makes it harder to digest. And so it may get through our gut lining if we have what we call a leaky gut. If the gut is a little bit more open, large molecules shouldn't get through, but it can. And if it does, then if the immune system is overactive or hypersensitive, and if we're producing antibodies too easily, then we make antibodies against gluten as if it was a bacteria or a virus or something like that. And then when we see it, our immune system attacks it and produces inflammation in our body. But that can also look like the thyroid gland. And so then when we eat it, not only does it attack the gluten molecule, but then it attacks the thyroid. And then it will ramp up initially, and it might cause more inflammation. And then as it produces more thyroid, it goes down. And then people take medication to increase their thyroid if you have an autoimmune disease. So if your thyroid gland becomes active, your immune system is going to attack it more. So when people are hypothyroid, they get, less thyroid, and then they go to the doctor and they give them medication like thyroxine or some medication that's going to increase thyroid, and then that causes the immune system to attack it more,
Oh.
and then it goes down, and then they give them more medication. So it's kind of like this up and down all the time. But if it's an autoimmune issue, the more active it becomes, the more the immune system is going to attack it. So
So basically, the more that they give them medication, it actually makes it worse and worse every time.
right. And that's why it's important to understand, like if it is being related to, maybe even caused by a gluten sensitivity or by some other food, then you need to eliminate that, because that's really the primary source. And, eliminate that and eliminate the antibodies attacking it, rather than taking a medication that may cause you to produce more thyroid, which temporarily may help, but then also may lead to more of an attack on your thyroid and more destruction.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what would be like, since it is or it does seem to be commonly overlooked or like not the first answer, what are the signs that someone is having thyroid issues?
Well, as I said, if it's hyperthyroid, people's eyes may start to bulge out. People may feel very irritable. They may be very thin. If they're over thyroid, if they're under, they may put on weight and can't lose it, like you're talking about. They may feel very tired and lethargic. They may have difference inability to really regulate the temperature of their body. They may feel cold all the time.
Yes, that my friend recently, well, actually she couldn't take hot showers for a long time. I don't know why. It could have been a mix of a bunch of things, but yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, the thing is, you have to really look at, typically you go to a doctor and let's say, I'm feeling tired, or having difficulty sleeping or whatever. They will do thyroid tests, and it may or may not show that there's an issue. And it depends on, how good the person is at interpreting the tests. But if you have certain antibodies, there's what we call TPO antibodies. That is a chemical produced by the thyroid gland, and that's what the antibodies are often related to. They may form antibodies against that, so they get TPO antibodies. Sometimes when they're doing a thyroid panel, they may not look for that. So the thyroid may look like it's producing, because there's different hormones like T3 and T4 and the balance of those. But thyroid stimulating hormone is TSH. So if that's increased, if that's high in your blood test, typically, why would it be high? It usually means that your thyroid gland is trying to put out more thyroid hormone, but it's not working. And so you're putting out more. Or it's overactive. And then there's it's pretty complex, but you have to look at the distribution of T3 and T4 and all of that to see. But you also have to see if there are antibodies against your thyroid gland. If there is, that would be typically Hashimoto's. And so then they're going to give you medication. Typically, very few traditional medical people are going to say, oh, maybe it's because of your diet, or
Right.
maybe it's because of something else. And obviously, they're never going to think, well, maybe it has to do with your brain or an imbalance in your brain or your nervous system. But ultimately, what regulates the immune system is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So that's why we say typically, the studies that have been out for over 30, 40 years on looking at how the hemispheres regulate the immune system, it's pretty consistent that the left brain activates the immune system and the right brain inhibits it, which is kind of the way the left brain and right brain work for almost everything. The left brain tends to be more activating, and the right brain tends to stop things or inhibiting. We get approach behavior from the left, and we get withdrawal behavior. But what's tricky is that, so typically, if we're just looking at left brain, right brain, people that have more left brain deficits and more right brain strong tend to get sick a lot and can't get over illnesses. So they tend to have a weaker immune system. They may get a lot of, I remember as a kid, I got pneumonia a lot. I got
You
I
did?
used to get bronchitis almost every winter, and it would take me a while to get over that. And other kids that have left brain delays usually have a history of chronic ear infections. They've been through a lot of antibiotics when they're a kid.
So right brain people get sick more often.
Yes,
Even though mom is die hard that you are a left brain person and she won't let it go. You're saying that you got sick all the time, so that means you're a right brain person.
yeah, I think she's, saying that I transformed myself maybe, but yeah, no, I was definitely a right brain dominant
We
person
believe
when I
you,
was a
Dad.
kid. I was, I swear. Yeah. So, but what can happen is that there's also the balance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and the sympathetic nervous system typically.
Wait, did I get sick a lot when I was a kid?
You didn't, but
Oh, I
Robbie
had
used,
eczema really
your
bad.
brother used to get sick.
Yeah.
Robbie used to get.
Yeah, Robbie
like,
used to get super sick. And
Yeah.
and I had eczema really bad for a while.
Yeah, well, but again, that's where eczema is an autoimmune issue, and similar to what you would see with, any what an autoimmune disorder is. It's eczema is where your immune system is attacking your skin cells or chemicals in your skin cells that it thinks is like a bad guy. If it's attacking your joints or your synovial fluid, that's rheumatoid arthritis. If it attacks what's called myelin basic protein or the cover of nerve cells, that becomes MS, multiple sclerosis. If have it attacks your thyroid gland, then you may have Hashimoto's. It's all basically the same for the most part. It's the same issue, but it just kind of depends on what's called molecular mimicry, meaning that the cells of a particular tissue of your body, the immune system thinks it looks like a bacteria or a virus or some sort of, pathogen. And it's mixing it up because they look similar. So that's where it's saying molecular mimicry. It may be a certain chain of amino acids in something like strep virus or strep bacteria may look like a chain in casein in dairy. And so the immune system just sees that chain of amino acids, and then we develop antibodies against that. And so every time that is reintroduced, we form a memory. Our antibodies have like a memory system where that's how we become immunized. That's natural immunity. We get sick, our immune system sees this invader, the antibodies attack it, they develop, specific molecules. It calls in the killer cells, which are mainly white blood cells and natural killer cells to kill it. And then it forms a memory so that if that same pathogen gets into our body again, we're going to attack it very quickly. So that's the thing. When we see something for the first time, it might take 7 or 14 days for our immune system to really rally and fight it. But then once we do that, once our immune system forms a memory, next time we see that, we attack it really quickly. And that process is how we, fight off infections.
Okay. Okay, so for people that are like struggling with weight loss and feel lethargic and can't regulate their hot and cold, which actually I feel tired all the time and I can't regulate my hot and cold, so now maybe I should check this out. But that's all to say, what are like the natural ways? You're saying no, like take out gluten, see how that affects you. Are there other things?
Yeah, I think, what most people should do if they're not feeling good in general is should get a good blood test and see what's happening in their blood and look at their immune system. And what we see more and more is that there is what we call a Th2 dominance, where the B cells are producing antibodies too easily. And so we're becoming more sensitive and to foods or to things that we're exposed to. Different chemicals, if they bind to proteins in food or in our tissue, can also, become a source of inflammation. But a lot of it is all being lifestyle driven. So really, it has to do with, how you're living. Are you healthy? And you might have food sensitivity, so you should get tested to see if you have any sensitivity to food and look for antibodies. You may want to do different tests that will look to see if you have a leaky gut going on. But again, for me, the first thing you should do is really look to see if your brain is out of balance. And if you have things that may be going back to your childhood, like retained primitive reflexes, that is where even people that are right brain creative, so typically the way the right brain is going to work is it over suppresses the immune system. So you wouldn't expect to get autoimmune. But if you've had issues in your brain since you were a kid, like retained reflexes, you may have immaturity of your brainstem and you may be in a more sympathetically dominant state. So the sympathetic nervous system, which tends to be more inflammatory in nature. And then that may, either part of your immune system may get overactive. So even in people that are right brain dominant, if they're under stress, if they're stressed out, if they have a bad lifestyle of not sleeping enough, or they're causing more inflammation, or they're causing more of a stress response in their body. And if your right brain or left brain is delayed, you will have usually more of a sympathetic dominant nervous system. So, your heart rate may be fast, or you may, have higher blood pressure, or you may sweat easily, or may find it trouble sleeping. And then that can trigger the Th2 system to become too dominant, and you can form autoimmune disorders easily. And that can attack any part of your body. Again, if it attacks your pancreas or cells in your pancreas, then that might be type 1 diabetes, which is autoimmune. It could attack your cerebellum, and that may, what's called GAD65 antibodies, and that may cause a problem with your balance, or give you even symptoms like POTS, something like that.
Okay. And I'm just saying for everybody, if you're just tuning in, we've done a couple episodes on sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and what primitive reflexes are. I wish there was how on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen, where he's like, when you hear this word, take a shot. But I wish we could do things like that. Be like, you guys remember this gigantic word that has 900 million letters in it? But anyway, I know these are a lot to take in, but I guess we'll just keep establishing them so that it becomes common knowledge to everybody. But yeah, primitive reflexes, like he's saying, if you have retained primitive reflexes, there's a bunch of things that should be gone, that babies are innately born with. They're movements and stuff. I'm explaining this in front of you, but this is my average person breakdown. How many are there? 9 primitive reflexes?
Well, there's actually 30 or 40, but
Right.
I primarily focus on 9 or 10.
Okay, I knew it. Yes. But yeah, and they're just so, the way that you put out your hands and grasp them, or the way your toes move, or whatever, the way your spine twists when you're learning to crawl. All these things should be gone by
1 year.
1 year. Yep. And anyway, if you still have a lot of those things, which a lot of people do, and you don't really get tested for them, that's what he's saying. If you still have retained primitive reflexes, sometimes you need to go back and get rid of those, which he can do, and I watched him do for many people. And one day we'll probably do an example on here, and then you guys will find out. Whatever brave guest we have, we can find out what primitive reflexes they have live on here. But yes, that was just a little overview.
Yeah, I think the main thing people should take away from this, that they may not be aware of and that they may not be told by their doctor, is that, one, that if you have any sort of autoimmune issue, that it could be related to a brain imbalance. And, almost all imbalances in the brain start in childhood. And people that are more gifted on one side of the brain or the other naturally are more prone to imbalances. So that what you may see is people that are really talented, like what you're describing, that also may have autoimmune issues, or immune dysregulation, or chronic sickness. And that, they may have chronic digestive issues that goes back to their childhood. They may have a history of eczema. They may have, allergies or asthma. There's a lot that goes on, and it's all related to one another, or can be all related to one another. And that the answer is, if there is a brain imbalance that might be the root cause, then you need to deal with that. Because just taking medication or just altering your diet itself may not be dealing with the root cause. You may be dealing with the symptoms. And not that that doesn't help and make you feel better, but most people, I think, want to get to the root cause. Yeah. And, it's only kind of now that typical doctors out there are even relating that something like Hashimoto's may have something to do with your diet.
Yeah.
And that autoimmune issues. And in the traditional medical world, there's really primarily, right now at least, only one approach, and that's to massively kind of suppress your immune system. And, that works in that it might reduce the inflammation, but it also, makes you more vulnerable for other infections, and there can be side effects, especially if steroids, because steroids are the most common thing that they may use. But so people can be aware that if they have any sort of autoimmune issue, that it may be related to their diet, and that may also be related to an imbalance in their brain that starts from childhood. And that can all come together, especially during a stressful period. Like you said, you have somebody that was in the middle of doing a movie or whatever, or a show, and they blew up because the stress response and the sympathetic nervous system kicking in is going to increase inflammation in your body. And then if it does ramp that up, it's going to, any autoimmune system issue you have, it's going to flare up, because it's going to attack your body more, and it's going to become more flared up.
Yeah, I think from like all my friends who have been dealing with thyroid issues and kind of like all have just similar responses, because I guess the ones that I've spoken to are ones that are like in the industry, and they have to look a certain way and perform at a certain level and all this stuff. So the emotional toll that it's taken on them and on their confidence, especially being right brain people where you're people pleasers and you're like, why can't I get this right? Or why is this happening to my body? Why do I look this way? But yeah, it's become like, it's pretty common. It's a pretty common conversation. So it's like, I just find it so interesting that it's a problem that so many people are dealing with, and then it kind of causes so much emotional distress in them, and they don't really know how to go about it. So I think this will be really helpful, finding out, getting the right blood tests, doing, I guess, an elimination diet, things like that.
Yeah.
And then getting that brain right.
I mean, a lot of people automatically, because there is definitely a relationship between gluten and Hashimoto's, but it could be any food that could trigger that as well. And so, most people just know about gluten-free diet, or maybe gluten-free and dairy-free, what they call GFCF, gluten and casein. But it could be other foods. Like, we do blood tests on virtually every patient we have. And, I mean, many of them may have 20, 30, 40 different food sensitivities. And what's interesting is they might even have food sensitivities against foods that they've never really eaten. But it really comes down to the molecular makeup of that food. And if it looks like another food, and if the immune system has antibodies against that, then, that's where things go kind of haywire.
What? That's crazy. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. That's why people are like, yeah, well, I eliminated gluten, I eliminated dairy, and that's it. That's all I need to do. But yet and another thing, when people are doing elimination diets, most people aren't really told how to do that properly.
Yeah.
I have a lot of people come in and they go, yes, we did a gluten-free and dairy-free diet with my child, and we didn't see any difference. And then I'll usually say, so it was 100%. And they'll go, no, it was never 100%, but it was like 95%. But the way it works is that if you're going to do an elimination diet, it has to be 100%. And in my book, it has to be for at least 5 weeks. 6 weeks.
That's how long it takes for it to get out of your system completely?
Exactly. Now, some people will say that it's longer than that. I think that it's about 4 or 5 weeks that it takes to get out. And the point is that if you reduce gluten and dairy or some other food. And, but you're still taking some of it within that 4-week period, you're still triggering the antibody response. And if it's an immune response, then unless you've been completely off it, you don't know what your body looks like or feels like without that immune system constantly being triggered. So like a kid, it may show up as a behavioral issue because remember, these aren't allergies. People think of allergic responses and they'll talk about these as food allergies. Food allergy is a completely different thing, really. It's a different antibody. It's IgE, it's what we call eosinophils, histamine, mast cells. It's called an immediate hypersensitivity reaction where you get watery eyes, runny nose, your throat may close up. A food sensitivity could take up to 72 hours to be triggered. It's usually more of an IgG response or IgA, and it doesn't produce histamine or mast cell response, but it does produce an increase in inflammation, and that might only have an effect on behavior. So a kid, let's say who has ADHD, or a kid who's hyperactive, if every time he eats a food that he might be sensitive to, it might trigger more of that hyperactivity and might make him behaviorally act out or, make him angry or, can't pay attention, can't focus, and, may not be able to sleep. But yet there may be very little physical signs. They may not have eczema. They may not have, digestive problems or constipation or diarrhea, but it may show up purely as a behavioral issue. Or an adult, it may be like brain fog, like people feel like they just feel foggy. They just don't feel right.
Yeah.
Which may be, more of an immune inflammatory response affecting their body.
Okay, wow. This is all right, perfect. We covered a whole bunch of that. Okay, yeah, because I think...
Now, you said you had eczema as a kid? I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I would take those baths with like oatmeal baths.
Oh, okay.
Right, Mom? Remember?
Okay. All right. So, yeah so that's, an autoimmune issue like that. Yeah. And you didn't get sick a lot as a kid, though, right? You didn't get sick a lot. I don't remember her being sick much, no. You were pretty healthy, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you laughed a little too hard at that. No, I think this will be good. I think a lot of people will have, we'll probably have a lot of questions. We'll probably have to do another episode on this. Maybe bring on one of my friends if they're open to talking about it. But
well, to give them practical information.
Yeah, let's do that.
If you want the way to do an elimination diet to see, because really the only way for sure to really know if you have a food sensitivity that might be triggering something like thyroid or something else is to first identify if you have antibodies. But blood tests can be not 100% accurate. You really need to eliminate the food, and you need to eliminate it, in my mind, at least, I would say 5 or 6 weeks, completely 100%. Even a little bit, even microscopic amounts of it could trigger inflammation in your body. So it has to be 100%. If during that period of time you get exposed to it in some way, accidentally, then you need to start over. So you need to eliminate the food completely. And it may be multiple foods. So you might want to eliminate, 3, 4, 5 foods at a time. Then what you do is after you've been off it for at least 5 weeks, let's say 6 weeks, then you can reintroduce it. And the way that you typically reintroduce it is you may start in the morning, and I usually tell parents if they're going to do it with their kid, do it like on a Saturday, because you don't want to start messing with this in the middle of their school week, and then you may not be able to control what food they're eating that day. So you might want to do this on a weekend, let's say. So you start with a little bit of that food. So let's say it's gluten. You've been off gluten for 2 months, and now you want to see if gluten's going to trigger anything. First of all, do you feel better in those 2 months? Are you feeling better? Are you sleeping better, less fog, less eczema, whatever it may be? Your thyroid is doing better. And then you take some gluten. So you would eat, let's say, a little bit of gluten in the morning. So let's say it's a piece of bread or something, and see how you feel. If you don't feel anything significantly different, then for lunch you take a little bit more. And then if you're not feeling any immediate responses, which you may not, then you eat, let's say, much more for dinner, like kind of load it up. And then the next day you don't eat gluten again. So now you got to wait because the symptoms may not show up for 2 to 3 days. And so you kind of sit back and see, am I going to feel anything? Is anything that I was feeling before I went on the diet that I didn't feel good, does that come back in any way? Or, do you get anything like diarrhea, or does your stomach get all bloated, or do you not feel good, or do you feel foggy again? Anything, if you have any symptoms. If you don't have any symptoms when that happens, then chances are you don't have a food sensitivity to that food. If you do get symptoms, then you most likely do, and you should be off it. Now, the idea is, why do you have that, and what do you do to get rid of that sensitivity? Some people may say, well, once you have a sensitivity, you may never get rid of it. I disagree, because we've done many, many blood tests, and if it's being regulated by the brain, and the brain not controlling the gut and the immune system, and you get the brain working better, then you may not, those antibodies may go away, and you may be able to eat anything that you want, right?
Okay.
Which is the good news. So, if people are going to do an elimination diet for themselves, it has to be 100%. You reintroduce it. And then what we typically do is, if they've reintroduced it that one time and there wasn't any symptoms, now if they're doing multiple foods, now they should then take that food out. And if they have symptoms from putting it in, they should wait until those symptoms go away and now try and introduce another food. So let's say they've eliminated dairy and gluten and eggs. They may do that, be off all of them at the same time. But now you don't know if, let's say you're feeling better, but you don't know, is it because of the dairy? Is it because of the gluten? Is it because of the eggs? Is it because of all three? So you need to test individually to see which one. But again, that needs to be done very specifically. You don't want them to overlap. You want to make sure, okay, I tested gluten. I felt bad. Now the symptoms are gone. Now I'm feeling better because everything's eliminated. Now let me try egg, or let me try dairy. If you go through that and you don't have any symptoms when you reintroduce, or you didn't feel better when you took them away, then you may not have a food sensitivity. Or what you may want to do is then start to do what's called a rotation diet, meaning that you may start to eat it like 4 days. Every 4 days you can try it again, and you do that. So I usually say, do what's called a 4-day rotation diet. So let's say, if it's one day you may eat gluten, the next day you have dairy, the next day you have eggs, next day you don't have any of them, and then you rotate it in again. And if you go through that, let's say 4 times, and you're not feeling bad, you're not feeling symptoms come back, then you can go 3 days rotation. So 1 day egg, 1 day gluten, 1 day dairy, 1 day egg, 1 day gluten, 1 day dairy, and see how you feel. And then if you feel okay with that, then you start doing it every 2 days, and you may start combining them together, because it may be the combination of the foods that gets you, and the food individually isn't. If you make it through that after a few weeks of doing that, and you don't feel bad at all, then you may not have any sensitivity. But if you do at any point, then you may want to eliminate that food again and look into it.
Oh, that's tedious.
It may be tedious, but
it'll save your life. So I guess it's important too.
yeah, it's the only way it really is kind of bulletproof, is to do it that way, because you can't just go by blood tests.
Yeah, no, that's very, very good to know, because I guess some people are just like, well, I stopped eating bread for like a little while, but then when I went to dinner, I had a bite of cake, but like, who cares, whatever. And it's like, no, that's you have to do it the right way.
Exactly, because again, many people think gluten-free means 95%, and that's not the way it works.
Go hard or go home, guys, for real. Okay, perfect. This is a lot of great information.
Do you do a gluten-free diet? You were doing that for a while, right?
Yeah, I've done it before, for sure.
And does it make you feel better? Does it make you feel different in any way, or?
I think so. Yeah, I like go back and forth, but then I like also like love to have a beer, and then I'll just be like, oh, a nice beer. But yeah, I should do that again. But I think I'm pretty okay. Anyway, we'll try it out. I'll do it with you guys. It'll be a whole fun experiment. Yeah, I think this was really informative. If any of you guys have questions, like I always say, send them in to the Right Brain Podcast on Instagram or our email, which is also the Right Brain Podcast. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Okay. Ciao.
Ciao.